The vibrant colors of the Kent cloth draped over Agiwa's shoulders were a brutal mockery of her soul's true state. She stood before the village elders, her face a mask of feigned humility, while inside, a storm raged. At 23, she was a woman of ambition and dreams, a scholar who had secretly taught herself to read from borrowed newspapers and discarded books. Her greatest aspiration was to move to Accra, to start a life where her intellect, not her bloodline, would define her. But today, a different fate was being woven for her by the hands of tradition and her father's desperate promises. Her future husband, a man she had only seen from a distance, was introduced to her. His name was Kwesi, a poor farmer from a neighboring village known for nothing but his calloused hands and a quiet, unassuming demeanor. He wore a simple, worn smock that did little to hide his slim frame. Agiwa's father, a once proud chief who had fallen on hard times, had arranged the marriage to settle a forgotten debt. A marriage of sacrifice, he called it. Agiwa called it a life sentence. As Kwesi approached, a hush fell over the crowd. He bowed his head respectfully to the elders, but his eyes, when they met Agiwa's, were not those of a simple farmer. They held an unsettling depth, a calm and knowing gaze that made her stomach clench with an unfamiliar fear. They were eyes that had seen more than the tilling of soil, eyes that held secrets she could not even begin to imagine. He didn't look at her with longing or gratitude, but with an odd sense of shared burden. That night, as the final rites were performed, her older brother, Kwame, whispered a warning. "He is not what he seems, Agiwa. Be careful what you wish for. You wanted a future far from here, but you might just find a destiny you can't escape." Her heart sank. She hated Kwesi for being the instrument of her misfortune, a stark reminder of all she was losing. She hated her father for his weakness, her family for their silent acceptance. She was trapped, a gilded bird in a cage built of her family's shame and her own unfulfilled potential. She would be a farmer's wife, her intellect wasted on chores and her dreams buried beneath the red earth. The most unnerving part was a small, polished wooden box that Kwesi had brought with him. He hadn't offered it as a gift. Instead, he clutched it with a strange reverence, like a relic of immense value. As the drumming and dancing filled the night air, Agiwa felt a profound, chilling certainty. Her life was not over, but had only just begun, a life tethered to a man who was an enigma, a man who would either be her salvation or her ultimate undoing. The whispers of the village soon faded into a deafening silence as Agiwa looked at her future husband, feeling a cold dread wrap around her soul. She had been forced to marry a man who was poorer than her, not knowing that he was also the prince of the kingdom. She was a lamb being led to a slaughter, and she had no idea what fate lay in store for her. The morning sun, usually a source of warmth and promise, felt like a spotlight on Agiwa's humiliation. The journey to Kwesi's village, a mere 2 hours on a dusty path, felt like a passage into exile. Kwesi walked ahead, his shoulders straight, his silence heavier than any load. He did not speak to her, did not offer a hand when they crossed a small stream, treating her less like a new wife and more like an unwelcome guest. Her mind replayed her brother's words, "He is not what he seems." She clung to them, searching for a deeper meaning, a sign that this wasn't her entire life now. Kwesi's home was a small, well-kept mud hut, exactly as humble as the village gossips had described. But as Agiwa stepped inside, a strange sense of dissonance settled over her. The single room was meticulously clean, the earthen floor swept to a smooth finish. A simple mat lay on the ground, but in a corner sat a carved stool of such intricate design it belonged in a chief's palace. Her eyes darted to the small, polished wooden box he carried, which he now placed with almost religious care on a high shelf, far from her reach. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow, grinding torture. Agiwa performed her duties with a chilling efficiency, her every movement a silent protest. She fetched water, cooked the simple meals of kenki and fish, and swept the compound, all the while her heart hardening into a stone of pure resentment. Kwesi, for his part, remained a complete mystery. He would leave at dawn to tend to his farm, returning at dusk, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes still holding that same unsettling, knowing calm. He spoke only when necessary, asking a question about a meal or the state of the hut. Never did he speak of love, of their life together, or of his family. One evening, as she sat outside, grinding pepper, she overheard the village women talking in hushed tones. "Did you see how he looked at her?" one said. "He treats her like a duty, not a wife." Another replied, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "Some say his family arranged this. A debt, they say. He's a good man, but he carries a heavy burden." The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they confirmed her deepest fears. She wasn't an unfortunate bride, she was an object, a transaction. A few nights later, unable to sleep, Agiwa crept to the shelf where the box lay. Her fingers traced the smooth, cool wood. It was locked, but she knew the secret was within. She knew that Kwesi, her new husband, was not merely a simple farmer. And the truth, she was sure, would be her weapon. She wouldn't just escape this life, she would break free and ensure his quiet world came crashing down with her. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her revenge. Agiwa's resentment had found a new focus, a mission. The polished wooden box wasn't just a curiosity, it was a key. A key to Kwesi's secrets and, through them, to her own freedom. Her days, once filled with the monotony of chores, were now an intricate game of observation. She watched him, cataloguing his every move. He woke before the sun, his prayers a soft, rhythmic murmur she couldn't quite make out. He left for his farm, but unlike the other farmers who trudged with heavy tools, Kwesi walked with a quiet grace, his stride purposeful and light. His hands, though calloused, were not the cracked and rough hands of a man who toiled from sunup to sundown. They were strong, yes, but almost elegant in their build. One afternoon, a traveling merchant from a distant town passed through their village, hawking rare textiles and spices. He stopped at Kwesi's hut, his eyes widening slightly as he saw Agiwa. "Oh, the new wife," he said, his smile a little too knowing. He glanced towards the door, where Kwesi had just entered. "Your husband, he has a certain air about him. Not a man of the earth, if you understand my meaning. He reminds me of a man I once served in Kumosi, a noble of great prestige." The merchant's words hung in the air, a drop of poison in Agiwa's already bitter heart. She dismissed him with a curt nod, but his words resonated. Kwesi's silence, she realized, was not from simplicity, but from a habit of command. That night, she feigned sleep, listening to Kwesi's soft, even breathing. When she was sure he was deeply asleep, she crept off the mat, her bare feet silent against the cold earthen floor. The moon cast a pale glow through the window, illuminating the small room. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the shelf, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cool wood of the box. The weight of it was surprising, heavier than she had imagined. She carried it to the moonlight, her breath catching in her throat as she examined the lock. It was a complex mechanism, not a simple keyhole, but a series of interlocking symbols carved into the wood. She tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. Frustration flared, hot and sudden. She was so close. Just then, a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze, the box clutched to her chest. A deep, calm voice, Kwesi's voice, cut through the silence. "Agiwa," he said, and the single word was not a question, but a quiet statement of fact. "What are you doing with my box?" The spell was broken. She was caught, her scheme revealed. Shame, hot and burning, flooded her cheeks. But it was not shame for being caught, but for the truth that was now, finally, within her grasp. She turned, ready to face him, to unleash the torrent of her rage and frustration. But his eyes, even in the dim light, were not filled with anger, but with a profound, almost devastating sadness. It was the look of a man who had known this moment was inevitable, a moment of betrayal that he had foreseen and waited for. Agiwa held her breath, the small wooden box feeling like 1,000 weights in her hands. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kwesi stepped closer, the moonlight illuminating the unreadable sadness in his eyes. He reached out, not to seize the box, but to gently uncoil her rigid fingers from its lid. "You wanted to know," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that was both gentle and firm. "Now you know the truth." He took the box from her hand, with a series of precise, almost choreographed turns of the carvings on its lid. The lock clicked open. The sound was deafening in the stillness of the hut. He lifted the lid. Agiwa craned her neck, her heart a frantic drum. Inside, nestled on a bed of rich velvet, lay not gold or jewels, but a single object. It was a heavy, perfectly sculpted ring, a signet bearing the symbol of a roaring lion, its mane detailed in fine, intricate lines. Beside it lay a scroll, yellowed with age, tied with a ribbon of faded royal purple. Her eyes widened, instantly recognizing the lion sigil from stories and history classes. It was the crest of the great Asantehin, the symbol of the royal family. She looked from the ring to Kwesi, her mind reeling. The polished elegance of his hands, the knowing sadness in his eyes, the simple heart that felt so wrong, it all clicked into place. He wasn't a farmer at all. "This is who I am," Kwesi said, his gaze fixed on the ring. "Kwesi, the prince. My father, the king, has a tradition. All his sons must live for a time among the people, to understand their struggles, to learn humility. I was sent here, to live as a farmer, to find a wife who would accept me for who I appear to be, not for my title. A woman who valued a man's character over his wealth." He turned his gaze to Agiwa, and the weight of his stare was almost unbearable. "I was told of your family's death, of your father's despair. And I knew this was the one way to find a woman with nothing to gain from my name. So, you see, I did not choose you as my wife, my destiny chose you for me. And now you have the power to destroy me, to reveal my secret and force my return to a life I was not ready for. The life of a king's son." Agiwa felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. Her brother's words echoed again, "Be careful what you wish for. You wanted a future far from here, but you might just find a destiny you can't escape." She had spent her life trying to get away from her village, only to find herself chained to a far greater one. She could expose him, gain a queen status, and fulfill all her wildest dreams. But she would be a queen of a different kind, a queen of a life she was forced into. The box was no longer a weapon for her escape. It was a new prison, one with far more gilded bars. Agiwa did not move. She stood frozen in the moonlight, the weight of Kwesi's revelation crushing her. The man who had walked beside her on a dusty road, who had silently tended his simple farm, was a prince. The truth she had sought, the key to her escape, was no longer a weapon but a gilded chain. She had wanted to unmask a fraud, but instead, she had found a reality far more complicated than her wildest ambition. Her mind reeled, replaying every moment since her first marriage. The villagers' whispers, the knowing smile of the traveling merchant, her own brother's cryptic advice, it all made a terrible, devastating sense. She wasn't just trapped, she was a pawn in a game far beyond her understanding, one orchestrated by royalty. The anger, the pure, searing resentment that had been her constant companion for weeks, suddenly felt hollow. It was replaced by a cold, unsettling fear. What would she do now? The plan she had nurtured, to expose him, to shame his family, to demand her freedom, felt childish and insignificant in the face of his quiet strength and profound sadness. He had offered her a choice, a test, and she had failed it the moment she laid a hand on his box. She saw the irony in his words. He wanted a wife who valued character, and she had shown him only greed. The ultimate betrayal wasn't what he hid from her, but what she had hidden from him, her true, desperate intentions. He took the box and placed it back on the shelf, leaving the lid ajar, a silent invitation to her to see what was inside. Then he laid down on his mat, his back to her, and the hut filled with the sound of his even breathing. The unspoken challenge hung in the air. Her destiny was now in her hands, her choice entirely her own. She could seize the ring, and with it, a future as a princess, albeit one built on a foundation of blackmail and resentment. Or she could leave the box untouched, a silent promise of a different kind of life, one she had never considered. The rest of the night was an agonizing blur of thoughts, each one warring with the next. She imagined the triumphant look on her mother's face when she returned not as a farmer's wife, but as a future queen. She saw the envy of her friends, the respect of the elders. But she also saw the cold, unforgiving look in Kwesi's eyes, a promise of a life devoid of genuine affection. When the first rays of dawn pierced the window, Agiwa crept to the shelf. Her hand hovered over the open box, but she didn't touch the ring. Instead, she gently, deliberately, pushed the lid closed. It wasn't a gesture of defeat, but a silent declaration of a new path. Painting the horizon in strokes of orange and gold, but for Agiwa, the world had been reborn in shades of ambition. She moved with a newfound purpose, each chore a deliberate step towards a future she now saw with startling clarity. Kwesi watched her, his expression unreadable, as she prepared his morning meal, her movements fluid and sure. There was no need for words. The closed box was their silent treaty. She would not expose him, and in return, he would grant her a chance to prove her worth. But her motives were her own. She was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a quiet predator stalking a much larger prey. If she could not have freedom, she would have power, and a prince's heart was a far greater prize than his title alone. Weeks bled into a month, and a month into a season. The villagers commented on the change in her. Agiwa's smiles were more frequent, her voice softer. She tended to Kwesi with a devotion that seemed genuine, bringing him cool water to the farm and mending his clothes with intricate stitches. Kwesi, in turn, began to trust her in ways he hadn't before. He taught her the constellations and the names of the wild herbs that grew by the stream. In the evenings, he would tell her stories of a kingdom she now knew was his, speaking of grand festivals and ancient legends as if they were fables. He was testing her, seeing if she would break her silence, but she never did. She listened, rapt, filing away every detail, every name, every secret like a miser hoarding gold. One sweltering afternoon, a sleek, black sedan, an anomaly in the village of dusty paths and humble huts, rumbled to a stop before their home. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, his posture rigid and formal. He was followed by a younger man who carried a satchel. Kwesi froze, the easy smile he wore around her vanishing instantly. Kwesi Ose, the man in the suit announced, his voice carrying the authority of a royal decree. I am Lord Anain, head of the King's Council. We are here on official business. Agiwa felt a jolt of panic. Her mind raced, calculating the potential threat this posed. Was her time with him up? Would they take him away before she could execute her plan? She moved to stand beside Kwesi, a protective instinct overriding her fear. The two men looked at her, their gaze scrutinizing. "And who is this?" Lord Anain asked, his eyes narrow and assessing. Before Kwesi could speak, Agiwa stepped forward. "I am Agiwa," she said, her voice steady and clear, his wife. Her eyes met Kwesi's for a fleeting moment, a silent message passing between them. This was her moment to prove her devotion, a test she could not afford to fail. Lord Anain's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned back to Kwesi. "We have been sent by the king to assess your progress. The time for your return to Kumosi is near, Prince Kwesi. Your arranged marriage to the Princess of Denkaira is being finalized. She will make a good queen." The words hit Agiwa with the force of a physical blow. Her heart, which had been slowly softening towards him, turned to stone once more. She was never meant to be his queen. He was a temporary pawn. The air crackled with a silence more deafening than 1,000 thunderclaps. Lord Anain's words hung in the humid air, a poison dart that had found its mark. "Princess of Denkaira," Agiwa whispered the name to herself, the syllables tasting like ash. The fragile hope that had begun to blossom in her chest, the quiet fondness she had been nurturing for the man she believed was a farmer, shriveled and died. She wasn't an escape or a prize, she was a test, a temporary diversion, a commoner he was meant to observe and discard. The warmth she had felt was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. All her carefully laid plans to win his heart, to secure a life of her own making, were a mockery. As Lord Anain and his entourage drove away, the black sedan kicking up a cloud of red dust, Kwesi turned to her. His face was a mask of sorrow, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Agiwa, I can explain," he began, his voice raw. "Explain what?" she cut in, her voice low and dangerously calm. "That you were sent here to find a wife who loved you for yourself, but you already had one waiting in a palace. That I was never a wife, just a lesson in humility for a future king." Her eyes, once so full of fire, were now a glacial sheet of ice. The betrayal was a fresh wound, far deeper than the one inflicted by her family. They had sold her to a farmer, but he had offered her a counterfeit of a life. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her movements sharp and final. "Agiwa, please. My father's word is law. This marriage to the princess is a political alliance that cannot be broken. I knew it was coming, but I hoped I could somehow change it. The only part of my life I had control over was this test. I wanted to find someone real." "Real," she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "There is nothing real here, Prince Kwesi. Everything is a lie. Your life, this farm, this hut, even you." The Kwesi she had known was gone, replaced by a stranger with a crown waiting for him in a distant city. The naive girl who had shot the box and hoped for a different future was now a woman with a single, hardened resolve. Her plan was no longer to rise. It was to destroy. The prince had brought her down, and now she would ensure he felt what it was like to be a pauper. That evening, as Kwesi slept, a peaceful man dreaming of a life he could never have, Agiwa went to the shelf. She reached for the open box and, with a swift, decisive motion, she took the signet ring and the royal scroll. She had no intention of exposing him to the world or the media. That would make him a martyr. Instead, she would use his deepest secret, the very symbol of his identity, to bring his world crumbling down from the inside. She had been chosen for him, and now she would choose his fate. And it would be a fate far more painful than exile. Agiwa watched him from the shadows of the hut, a silent judge presiding over a personal court. He sat on the front steps, his head in his hands, a man broken not by poverty, but by the weight of a truth he could not bear to share. His sorrow was a symphony she had once found compelling, but now it was a hollow tune, a mere backdrop to the storm brewing in her heart. The pain of his betrayal was a cold, hard stone in her chest, and with every beat, she felt it hardening into a resolve as sharp as a razor's edge. Her goal was no longer escape. Her goal was justice, a private, brutal form of it that would wound him not in his public life, but in the deepest, most sacred part of his being. She would make him a pauper not in wealth, but in love, and in doing so, achieve her own silent, heartbreaking goal. She spent the following days in quiet contemplation, her every action a lie. She cooked for him, tended to the crops, and listened to his attempt at conversation with a placid expression that hid the fury raging beneath. He believed her silence was a sign of a new understanding, of a quiet acceptance of her fate. He mistook her stillness for a lack of ambition, but it was the stillness of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her plan, born of her pain, was meticulously crafted. It would not be loud, it would not be public, but it would be utterly devastating. One afternoon, when Kwesi was deep in the fields, she went to the storage box where he kept his money. She took a small sum, enough for a journey. Then, with the royal scroll tucked into her cupboard, she walked to the edge of the village. There, she found Kofi, a quick-witted boy known for his ability to run errands with absolute discretion. She knew his family was struggling, and the money she held out was a promise of a better tomorrow. "Kofi," she said, her voice a calm whisper, "I need you to take a message to Kumosi. You are not to speak of this to anyone. Not to your family, not to your friends. No one." His eyes widened at the sight of the seedy notes. "Yes, ma'am. I can do it." She took out the scroll, the royal insignia prominent and glittering in the afternoon sun, and unfolded it. On the back, in her neatest script, she had penned a short, precise note. It was a message that would change everything, a message addressed to a woman whose name she had found hidden in a small, folded note inside Kwesi's secret box, a name Kwesi had spoken of once, in a moment of drunken sadness, and then never again. Her name was Nana Sewa, and she was a woman he was forbidden to see. Agiwa had also attached a part of the scroll, ensuring the message would be delivered without question. With a final word of warning, she watched Kofi disappear down the winding road, the fate of a prince sealed in his small, grubby hands. Later that evening, as Kwesi sat with her by the fire, he spoke of his arranged marriage with a heavy heart, revealing his deep-seated resentment of his father's manipulation. Agiwa listened, a serene smile on her face, knowing that the real turmoil was yet to come. Her goal wasn't to expose his secret, it was to use it to create a new secret, one that would make his political marriage meaningless, and his emotional life a complete ruin. The days that followed were a torturous, silent game of cat and mouse. Kwesi, consumed by his own worries about the impending return to Kumosi, failed to notice the subtle shift in Agiwa. Her new warmth wasn't the blossoming of love, but the false glow of a fever. She served him with a smile that never reached her eyes, and he, blinded by his own grief, mistook it for forgiveness. The village, too, remained blissfully unaware of the dark currents beneath the surface. They saw a young couple finding their way, a poor farmer and his devoted wife, and their happiness was a source of quiet pride for the community. It was a perfect, fragile illusion, and Agiwa was preparing to shatter it into 1,000 glittering pieces. One sweltering afternoon, just as the sun was at its highest point, a taxi pulled up, an uncommon sight on their dusty road. A woman stepped out, her movements a study in grace and elegance. She wore a simple but expensive dress, and her face, though etched with a profound sorrow, was one of striking beauty. Agiwa was at the well, drawing water, when she saw her. The woman looked around, her eyes scanning the familiar, impoverished landscape as if searching for a ghost. Then, her gaze fell upon Kwesi, who had just emerged from the fields, his body streaked with sweat and dirt. A gasp escaped her lips, and she began to run, a soft, breathless sound following her. Kwesi, she cried out, the name a blend of relief and agony. Kwesi turned, his expression of exhaustion replaced with one of shock, followed by a look of sheer, unadulterated pain. Sewa. The name was a whisper, a breath of air that had been trapped in his lungs for years. He dropped the hoe he was holding and ran towards her. In the middle of the road, they collided in a desperate embrace. Agiwa, hidden behind the wall of their hut, watched the scene unfold with a detached curiosity. Her heart was a drum, but it was not beating with jealousy. It was beating with a cold, triumphant rhythm. Later, as they sat in the shade of a mango tree, Kwesi's head resting on Sawa's lap, she recounted the story. I came back, Kwesi, she said, her voice trembling. I found out what had happened, and I knew it was all a lie. I searched for you, but they said you were gone. And then, a letter arrived. An anonymous note with your family's royal seal. It told me you were here, that you were waiting for me, and that if I came, you would finally be free of your father's command. Agiwa's smile was a private, bitter thing. The boy she had entrusted with the message had delivered it, but with a twist. She had not asked him to say Kwesi was waiting for her. She had simply asked him to deliver the scroll, leaving the woman to assume the rest. It was a small lie, but it was her lie, a silent weapon that had hit its mark perfectly. She was not a queen, she was a creator of tragedies. Kwesi looked at Sewa, his eyes filled with a love that transcended the years of separation, a love Agiwa now knew she could never possess. It was then that a final, heartbreaking realization hit her. She had succeeded in bringing him the love of his life. She had succeeded in making his arranged marriage worthless. She had succeeded in her plan to wound him. But in doing so, she had wounded herself, too, because her own heart, against all odds, had started to care. The air in the small hut was thick with a joy Agiwa had never felt and a pain she had never anticipated. Kwesi, his face alight with a happiness that was as foreign to her as a foreign language, sat with Sawa, their hands intertwined. They spoke in soft whispers, recounting years of a shared past and dreams of a future that had seemed impossible just a day ago. Every word they exchanged was a nail in Agiwa's coffin, a testament to a love so profound it had endured the king's decree. She watched them, an uninvited guest at a feast she had prepared. Her revenge had been successful, but in bringing them together, she had exiled herself to the coldest corner of her own heart. The plan had been flawless, the execution perfect, yet the victory tasted of ash. She had wanted to hurt him, but now she understood that true pain was not in seeing him suffer, but in watching him find happiness without her. Sawa's eyes, soft with a profound gratitude, found Agiwa's across the room. I don't know who you are, she said, her voice gentle, but I owe you everything. You delivered the letter that brought him back to me. How can I ever repay you? Agiwa forced a small, tired smile. There is nothing to repay. I simply believe in true love. The words were a bitter lie. She had believed in her own version of love, a fragile, hard-won thing, and it had just been crushed. Later, as Kwesi left the hut to fetch fresh water, Sawa came to her. I know he hasn't told you everything, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He blames himself for our separation, but it wasn't his fault. It was his brother, Prince Adolfo. Adolfo was jealous of our love. He was the one who went to the king, twisting our story and convincing his father to banish Kwesi to this village and force me into another marriage. He's always been cruel, always wanting what Kwesi had. The words struck Agiwa like a physical blow. Her mind, an intricate clockwork of schemes, began to turn again. She had planned her revenge on Kwesi, but the true enemy, the source of all their suffering, was someone else entirely. Her goal, to make him a pauper, was still within reach, but now the path was different. The true pauper was not Kwesi, but the one who lacked love. The one who had no one to stand by him. And Adolfo, the cruel, envious brother, was a much more deserving target. The scroll she still had, a symbol of her power, suddenly felt like a key to a new and deeper vengeance. It was a weapon she would now wield not against the man she secretly loved, but against the man who had truly wronged him. And now he's trying to win the princess of Denkara's heart, Sawa continued, oblivious to Agiwa's racing thoughts. He thinks he's going to be king. But I won't let that happen. Not after all he's done. Agiwa's mind raced. Her original goal of causing Kwesi pain had been transformed. Now, she would use the scroll to give Kwesi and Sawa their happy ending, but in a way that would utterly ruin the man who had taken so much from them both. Her revenge was no longer about a broken heart, but about a family's betrayal. The heartbreak Agiwa felt was a bitter, stinging thing, but it was also a powerful fuel. It transformed her grief into a cold, unbreakable resolve. The love she had discovered for Kwesi in the quiet intimacy of their life, the love that now felt like a wound, would not be wasted. She would use it to destroy the man who had stolen his rightful happiness. Her goal was no longer to make Kwesi a pauper in love, but to make the true pauper, the man with no love, no loyalty, and no honor, pay for his sins. That man was Prince Adolfo. The royal scroll, the very thing that had brought her misery, now felt like a tool of fate, a sword forged in her own pain. She would use it to right the wrongs of a lifetime. The path to her victory would be paved with Kwesi's happiness, and in that, she would find her own twisted, unexpected form of solace. She left the village under the pretense of visiting a sick relative. Kwesi, consumed by the whirlwind of emotions from Sawa's return, gave her a distracted but genuine hug, thanking her for her kindness. His gratitude was a double-edged sword, and Agiwa bore it silently, her heart aching with a truth he would never know. She took the next available tiaro, a rickety bus packed with market women and their goods. The journey was long and dusty, the windows providing a panoramic view of the changing landscape. The gentle, rolling hills gave way to the bustling chaos of the city as they neared Kumosi. The noise, the heat, the endless stream of people, it was a world away from the tranquil isolation she had known. Arriving in the city felt like stepping into another reality, one where every second was a battle for space and attention. The aroma of roasting plantains mingled with the diesel fumes of the endless traffic. Agiwa, with a confidence she didn't truly feel, navigated the crowded streets. She had only one destination, the king's palace. Her only asset was the scroll, a silent proof of her marriage and Kwesi's true identity. The journey from the Tiao station to the palace gates was a blur of humanity and commerce. She was a peasant woman in a city of princes and merchants, but she carried a secret that gave her more power than any of them could imagine. She carried the truth. At the palace gates, two imposing guards in traditional royal wear stood watch. They looked at her with an air of dismissal. A village woman, dusty from travel, had no business on these hallowed grounds. "I am here to see Prince Adolfo," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. They laughed. "The prince does not see common folk." Without a word, Agiwa pulled the scroll from the fold of her cover. She held it up, the golden emblem of the royal family gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The laughter died on the guards' lips. They recognized the insignia immediately. With a shared look of shock, they stepped aside, their previous arrogance replaced by a quiet, fearful respect. She walked through the gates, the enormous compound unfolding before her. It was a world of opulent architecture and meticulously kept gardens, a place of power and secrets. She was no longer Agiwa, the poor farmer's wife. She was a silent avenger, a woman on a mission to settle a score. She was here to make a prince a pauper. As she entered the palace gates, she asked for directions to Prince Adolfo's chamber. She made her way through the large halls and finally arrived at his chamber. She knocked and entered there. She saw him pacing around the room with a worried look. She did not care what all that was about, she just showed him the scroll and revealed to him that his plot to become the king of Kumosi has failed because his attempt to separate Kwesi from his love and to convince his father to banish Kwesi from the city and also to marry the princess of Denkara is all out in the open now. He was really ashamed, and his father, the king, banished him from Kumosi and brought Kwesi and Sawa back into the palace. They got married and lived happily. As for Adwa, Kwesi gifted her a nice house and assigned her the headmistress of a big school. After all, she did not lose anything. Her determination has brought her victory.